Many shows that last more than one season tend to have episodes that fans consider to be really great or really terrible, and for me, Foster's Home is no exception. Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Comic Knight Zero. A few months ago, I covered an episode of Foster's Home I consider to be one of my absolute favorites, and so to mix things up, I wanted to cover an episode that I just absolutely hate. I'm sure this episode needs no introduction, but for those of you who are unfamiliar or don't remember the episode, though I don't know how you could forget about it, today we'll be talking about Everyone Knows It's Bendy, an episode that's probably angering many of you just by saying the title alone, so this should be fun. Before we get into it, just a quick reminder, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like as it lets me and YouTube know that you're enjoying the content. And if you want to see more videos like this, then be sure to smash that subscribe button, just be sure to get consent before you do. And before I forget, last month I did a 4-part series where a couple of friends and I rank theme songs of various cartoons from our childhood. So if those videos interest you, feel free to check them out. Aside from that, without further ado, let's get into it. We open inside the Foster's Home main office, in which a disgruntled family is putting an imaginary friend named Bendy up for adoption. Here, the parents voice their complaints to Harriman and Frankie about how much of a troublemaker Bendy is, citing instances of him smashing windows, stealing cookies, and writing on the wall. While this conversation is happening, we can see the family's son sitting with a somewhat remorseful look on his face, which Frankie and Harriman quickly pick up on. Personally, I think given Frankie and Harriman's position and how they're the ones seeing and handling the adoptions of the house, there's no doubt in my mind they've encountered families whose children use their imaginary friends as a scapegoat to avoid getting in trouble for something they did. Heck, if you have siblings, I'm sure at one point or another you might have done something that could have gotten you in trouble, but instead you blamed it on your younger brother to avoid any punishment. Sorry, Terry. So based on the body language they've observed from this child, it's easy to think that Bendy is simply the victim of being blamed by a troublesome kid. Heck, Harriman even says that this might be the case directly to the parents' faces.
Sir, madam, we see this sort of thing all the time. Have you considered that perhaps it is not Bendy performing these acts, but your son instead?
What? Sometimes kids blame their imaginary friends for things they've done themselves. You know, because they don't want to get in trouble. It's very common, really.
Now, you would initially think that this interaction would serve as a strong argument as to why Frankie and Harriman are so defensive of Bendy in this episode. But, as the events unfold, we all clearly see why this excuse just doesn't work, nor is it a strong enough reason for these two to behave this way given their history with those involved in this episode. But sorry, I'm jumping ahead. We then cut to Blue, Coco, Wilt, and Eduardo playing video games. Bendy walks in and, well, let's see what happens.
Hey, new guy. Want to play winner? What the heck was that all about?
Soon, Frankie and Harriman charge in demanding to know what happened, in which Blue and the others collectively explain how they all witnessed Bendy destroy the vase. However, their complaints fall on deaf ears as we witness firsthand Bendy's whole charade of innocence.
Sorry, buddy, but we saw you knock over those flowers.
What? Me? Why, I would never knock over... But I was in the... Oh no! It's happening again!
You know, I'm genuinely curious to know if this innocent act actually worked on Bendy's original family, or if they were onto him from the start and decided to never put up with it. I bring this up because I think Bendy's act here is something that would have been worth having the family mention as a warning to Frankie and Harriman, giving us as an audience some slight foreshadowing towards Bendy's bad behavior and how he tries to get out of trouble, while at the same time serve as a solid reason for Frankie and Harriman to initially doubt Bendy's innocence, think about his supposed emotional abuse from his family, then second guess themselves and believe Bendy anyway. Because if you told me you thought Blue was lying about something, I'd say you're probably right. Granted, I don't think he'd blame such an act on a new resident who literally just walked in, but given how mischievous Blue has been in the past, I wouldn't put it past him. But if you were to sit there and tell me that Wilt or Eduardo, of all people, two of the nicest, most sincere residents of the entire Foster's house, was lying to get someone in trouble, all I have to say is,
hey pal, you just blowing from Stupid Town?
You see, the main problem with this episode's plot is that it more or less sparks a rivalry that had no reason to exist, as well as no feasible way for innocent characters to defend themselves from blame. Already this interaction between Bendy and Blue and his friends is off to a terrible start, and I mean that both in and outside of the show. Inside the show, the Foster's gang has no idea why this random new guy just came in and ruined their fun, just to blame them and get them in trouble. As a viewer outside of the show, the fact that Bendy just does bad things to get Blue and his friends in trouble, all while unprovoked mind you, is just a terrible interaction to watch and is an idea that could have used a bit more work. Because, as you'll see throughout the episode, Bendy, for the most part, is only concerned with getting the Foster's group here in trouble. That, or I guess they're the only ones around when he actually does bad things? I don't know. All I can say is neither situation is a good one to watch. Moving from there, we enter a montage of Bendy causing trouble for Ed, Wilt, and Coco individually. I suppose based on how Bendy framed each one of these respective incidents, there could be a small chance you wouldn't think it was actually Bendy, seeing how it was Wilt's shoes that obviously caused these mud prints, or how Harriman saw Coco wanting to touch this cake prior to her being framed for actually touching the cake. But like I mentioned before, all these displays of malintent and bad behavior seem to be targeted at the Foster's gang here. Now, if you were in Frankie and Harriman's position, you could ask yourself, why in the world would this new guy randomly target this group? They literally just met. And you know, it's weird, because even as a viewer, I have the exact same question. Why in the world would this new guy randomly target this group? They literally just met. There was no setup for any kind of conflict or rivalry between Bendy and this group, so why is this happening? When you start asking yourself these questions, you start to realize that the reason why this episode sucks so much is because there wasn't a proper setup for Bendy to do this in the first place. Yes, I get it. He's a misbehaving imaginary friend. But why though? What is he wanting to get out of this whole thing? If he wants to get the Foster's gang punished because they have something he wants, then sure, I can understand that. While it's not an ideal motivation for this antagonist, it's already 10 times better than the non-existent motivation we're witnessing right now. Just give me something. Anything. Please. I'm begging you. We now move on to another instance of Bendy's misbehavior, in which Blue catches Bendy writing Blue's name on the wall. Frankie and Harriman walk in, of course. Blue tries to defend himself, but still gets blamed for the writing anyway. And although we've already witnessed a few instances of Bendy causing trouble for others, this scene still completely baffles me with how Frankie and Harriman are still sticking up for this guy. Yes, I know how mischievous Blue himself can be at times, but I have to ask, why would you think Blue has anything against Bendy since this dude literally just moved in? I just really feel bad for Blue. I mean, listen to the frustration in his voice here.
Oh, for goodness sake, Master Blue, who would be so stupid as to write his own name on the wall?
Not me! This guy, whoever he is, he did it!
Bendy?
This guy, whoever he is. The fact that Blue didn't even care to remember Bendy's name is a clear sign of how unattached and unfamiliar Blue is with Bendy. Again, giving no clear sign as to why you would even think Blue is out to cause trouble for him in the first place. Anyways, after this little exchange, Blue gets sent to his room where we can find Wilt, Ed, and Coco, who have also been sent here for punishment. Although Bendy lacks any character motivation himself, we somewhat get some motivation from Blue during this scene, as it's reached a point where he's completely fed up with Bendy's nonsense. And soon, Blue begins scheming on ways he can try and stop Bendy. That, or at least prove to Frankie and Harriman how much of a liar Bendy actually is. To prove this, the Foster's gang set up a baseball and baseball bat near a large glass window, knowing that Bendy likely wouldn't resist the chance to smash it. In the effort of proving to Frankie and Harriman that Bendy is a liar, they plan on taking a photo of him in the act as a means of evidence. But as fate would have it, Bendy smashes the window and is already gone before they even see him. As they inspect the empty scene, Coco accidentally takes photos of Blue holding the baseball bat. Obviously these photos will be used to direct the blame towards Blue, but despite knowing how the scene was about to unfold, I still found this part to be pretty funny, honestly, which kind of feels odd. Like, it's weird how I have to say this moment feels strange for being funny, because naturally, right, when I envision an episode of Foster's Home, I envision it being something I'll laugh at, something I'll have fun with. But that's the problem with this episode. I haven't been laughing. This episode hasn't been any fun up until this point, and we're already 7 minutes in. So far, this has been nothing but annoying and frustrating to watch, so any signs of comedy at this point just feels completely foreign to me. Now, am I saying this episode shouldn't have any jokes in it? No, not necessarily, but if the first joke you tell can only be found at the midway point, and you've done nothing but frustrate me up until now, then I'd say you've already missed the mark on the tone you're trying to set. it's too late at this point. Unless you're trying to frustrate me even more, then congrats, you did it. As one would expect, Frankie, Harriman, and Bendy arrive at the scene. They ask what happened. Blue says it was Bendy, but Frankie and Harriman don't believe him. While I do hate that this continues to be the outcome, I will say that in this particular instance, Bendy telling the truth is actually more believable here. Partly because he kisses up to both Frankie and Harriman during this interaction, and there's still the fact that there's photos of Blue that make it seem like he's the actual culprit. But we have to remember, Blue isn't the only one here who actually knows the truth of what happened.
He's totally framing me! You gotta believe me! Guys, you gotta back me up!
Okay, I won't lie. While I am a little mad that Wilt and the others completely abandoned Blue, I can at least understand why they did it. I mean, I wish they didn't, but I totally get it. After dealing with Bendy and his nonsense all day and constantly getting in trouble, I think it becomes extremely easy to understand how much of a losing battle it is to defend yourself against Bendy. I imagine the whole effort just feels like a lost cause, so why would you even waste your time? It's just appalling to me how one little monster could suddenly ruin the good standing and reputation of characters like Eduardo, Wilt, and Coco. The idea of that even happening is just absolutely baffling to me. Anywho, as you may have already guessed, the Foster's group has been sent to their room for punishment once again. Here we see an understandably angry Blue who's venting to the others about how much of a pain Bendy is, making it clear that he wants to stop Bendy some way, somehow. But Wilt and the others try their best to dissuade Blue from getting back at Bendy, likely because, as I mentioned before, they realize how much of a waste of time the whole effort would be. But if there's anything we know about Blue, it's that he never knows when to back down, which is really in character for him, though that's something I obviously can't say for Frankie and Harriman. They just feel so out of character in this episode, so hey, if there's one characterization they're gonna get right, I'm glad it was at least Blue. If anything, I view his stubbornness as a bit of a double-edged sword. On one hand, it means that he's able to persevere through almost any challenge thrown at him, but on the other hand, it means he's likely to crash and burn in a battle he's completely losing. So, let me ask you, how do you think this is gonna end? I'd tell you the answer now, but I'd hate to ruin the surprise. While Blue is venting to Wilt and the others, we can hear Bendy turn on the intercom and begin doing voice impressions of Frankie and Harriman, and just absolutely roasting them, which, given their egregious behavior so far, I actually think they deserve it. Once again, Blue makes his pursuit to catch Bendy in the act, which he successfully does, but while blinded by his own early victory, fails to notice that Bendy is already long gone at this point. As expected, Frankie and Harriman catch Blue with the intercom and paint him as the culprit. Blue tries to defend himself and says it was Bendy. Bendy's then called to the foyer where he lies and says he was scrubbing toilets with his toothbrush, that way Frankie didn't have to clean them herself. I will say, although I'm completely done and fed up with Bendy, I have to admit he does know how to kiss up to Frankie and Harriman in just the right ways. It doesn't excuse Frankie and Harriman's abhorrent behavior, but it does give the audience a good reason to hate Bendy due to his manipulative behavior, showing how toxic and troublesome he really is, and making it clear why his original family just didn't want him. Oh, and to top it all off, Bendy reveals that the toothbrush he'd been cleaning toilets with was actually Blue's. With the intercom incident, and likely the whole toothbrush thing, being the final straw, Blue begins concocting a plan that'd be so well thought out and detailed that Bendy could never possibly lie his way out of. And so, here's how it goes down. Bendy wanders into the kitchen and notices a cookie jar saying "do not touch," so naturally Bendy eats the cookie, but to his surprise is photographed while eating it. In an effort to cover his tracks, Bendy sets off to destroy the photo, but to his surprise, the photo is completely covered in superglue. Since the photo can't be destroyed, he attempts to color over it with a nearby marker, but to his surprise, the marker was already rigged to explode. He tries fleeing the scene to avoid getting caught, but to his surprise, he ends up making a trail leading straight to him. He attempts to wash away the marker ink with the bathroom sink, but to his surprise, the sink handle breaks off completely. With the water now flooding into the hallway, Bendy tries stopping the flood with a nearby towel, but to your surprise, I have nothing else to add on this note. With the sink still overflowing, Bendy attempts to plug up the sink altogether, but to his surprise, the water starts flooding through the walls. Soon the water starts flooding throughout the other rooms of the house, and before long, the entire house is destroyed from the inside. With the cat now out of the bag and nowhere else to run, Bendy has finally been caught red-handed. Blue explains that the whole thing was part of his master plan, and we're left with this final scene.
Blue? You flooded the house!
Yeah, but Bendy took a cookie!
Blue, what did you do?
And And that was Everyone Knows It's Bendy. As you could already tell from my earlier comments, this episode was just extremely frustrating to watch. Not because of Frankie and Harriman's consistent poor choice in judgment throughout the episode, but also because the way Bendy was introduced and written, it just doesn't work. After getting through the entire episode, at no point are we ever given a reason or motivation to why Bendy is targeting Blue and his friends. They haven't done anything to him to warrant being on the receiving end of his bad behavior. You can't just throw these characters into a conflict that came out of nowhere or had no lead up to it. It just doesn't make any sense and is a little confusing. Honestly, I think it is possible to write a character that targets or antagonizes your main cast in a way that still works. The key element lies solely in the setup and premise. Take a character like Kevin from Ed, Edd n Eddy, for example. Many times throughout the series, we've seen Kevin display anger, malice, or acts of violence towards the Eds. Yet, more often than not, the average fan of the show doesn't have a problem with this and still finds it entertaining. But why? Well, given how the Eds consistently upset the kids of the cul-de-sac with most of their scams, it's easy to surmise that Kevin's hatred towards them stems from this idea. Now, while his antagonization or bullying of the Eds isn't always warranted, as he can go a little too far at times, we can at least understand his negative actions toward them. It's all about cause and effect. The Eds try to scam others out of their money, and therefore Kevin is mean to them. And I think a similar scenario could be applied here as well, but you have to tweak the idea a little bit. In the case of the Eds, if they do bad things to others, then bad things will happen to them. But in this Foster's episode, Blue and his friends have been innocent from the start. So in this case, instead of Blue and the gang doing something that would provoke Bendy, I would instead have Bendy see the Foster's gang with something that he wants, in which he'll rudely demand they give it to him. They'll say no, which they have every right to do, and it's from there that Bendy wants to target them because they didn't let him have his way. And the nice thing about this idea is that it's something that could easily work within their first interaction with Bendy, where Bendy sees the gang playing video games. He could demand that they let him play now. Blue would politely say no, but says he'll give him a turn after this round. Bendy, having not liked that answer, would then proceed to smash the vase and frame Blue and his friends. And it's from then on, Bendy will start targeting this group. Now, is this an ideal motivation for Bendy? No, probably not. I'm sure most of us would rather not have this episode exist at all, but if we're stuck with this plot and we had to retool it, this is how I'd write it to have it make more sense. Because the fact that Bendy specifically targets the Foster gang without them provoking him in any way is either a huge oversight or just pure laziness from a writing perspective. Because while it's true that there exist people who commit bad acts with no discernible reason, you can't just write a character like that in your story without a proper setup or reasonable explanation. All it does is just make viewers clueless and frustrated with how they just have to sit there and put up with this awful character's antics. You can't just tell me bad guy do bad thing, because that's a bad plot. That's bad reasoning, and if I'm not given a good reason to keep watching this, then why should I even be here? Putting the targeting aside though, I think if we really wanted Bendy to be more of a nuisance to the house in general, I would have had him mess with other Foster's residents as well. So much to the point that eventually all residents, except Bendy, end up with some form of punishment, just to emphasize how out of hand the situation has become at this point, while still highlighting how good Bendy is at manipulating Frankie and Harriman to always side with him. That way it's more of a collective effort from the residents to prove how much trouble Bendy really is. Again, this isn't a perfect plot, but hey, it's an idea worth considering. I'm just aggravated with how mean-spirited this episode is. It falls in a similar vein to Arnold Betrays Iggy from Hey Arnold, if you've seen that episode, where it generally ends with Arnold being made a laughingstock at the end, all just to apologize to Iggy, showing that Iggy was way too harsh to Arnold given how hard Arnold tried to fix a mistake, but that's for another time. Anyway, despite what you may think, I actually have no problem with Bendy being manipulative. If he's gonna consistently get away with things he should have gotten in trouble for, then manipulating those around him is a reasonable way for him to pull that off. Granted, it comes at the cost of ruining the characters of Frankie and Harriman for this episode, but his manipulative behavior is something I'm actually okay with. Because we have to remember, Blue, the main character of the series, is also a manipulator. However, the key difference between the manipulative behavior of Blue and Bendy is Blue usually gets his rightful punishment or learns his lesson. Bendy, however, does not, which is probably the biggest gripe I have with this whole episode, because basically all the ending had shown to us was that Bendy was never at fault or held accountable for anything he did. Everything Blue had gone through up to this point ultimately led to nothing, and that's just frustrating to watch. Yes, I get it. He missed the point about how the house was destroyed. But Frankie and Harriman are missing the point on how Bendy had been lying and framing others the whole time. There isn't any satisfying closure or validation given to Blue. You can punish him for destroying the house, but I still think a big thank you is in order for showing them how they were being manipulated. While this episode is undoubtedly one of the worst in the series, part of the reason why it doesn't have a satisfying conclusion is due to time constraints and many scenes from the original storyboard needing to be cut. I'm sure many of you know this, but this episode is written by Lauren Faust, an animator who's either created or worked on shows such as MLP Friendship is Magic, Powerpuff Girls, DC Superhero Girls, and Kid Cosmic. Faust had originally planned for this to be a 22-minute episode. However, this was around the time Cartoon Network wanted to experiment and have their shows move from 22-minute to 11-minute episodes. While the change didn't stick around for too long at the time, it did at the very least affect this episode, and years later, Cartoon Network would revisit this format and make it the most common one we still see on the network today. And so, given this change in format during the episode's storyboarding, some scenes ended up being cut in the end, specifically the scene where Bendy would have gotten the punishment he deserved according to Faust. Though I think there was a compromise when deciding on a runtime, as this episode in particular has a runtime of about 13 to 14 minutes and is ran as a second segment to When There's a Will, There's a Way, which has a runtime of about 9 minutes. So I imagine this episode would have been even worse had it fully conformed to the 11-minute runtime. And if you hated this episode with a passion, then trust me, you're not alone, as Lauren Faust herself made it publicly clear that she even regretted writing it, going as far as making a general apology to those who watched it and even promising that Bendy would never appear in the series again, which thankfully, he does not. As part of researching this episode, I stumbled across a few different blog posts where others shared their thoughts on the episode, and what I learned is that some viewers claim they will never forgive Faust for writing this episode, as if they're holding some kind of grudge against her, which I personally think is a little absurd. Now, if there's a writer or creator whose work you're just not an overall fan of based on their writing, art style, or maybe even their personality, then yes, I completely understand. However, if you're out there holding grudges against them because they write a bad episode every now and then I'm gonna have to ask you to just turn off the TV for a little while. Yeah, I get it, she wrote a terrible episode, but I guarantee you she has written more great episodes than she has terrible ones. Because guess what? She wrote Star Wars, she wrote Mac Daddy, she wrote Good Wilt Hunting, heck, she even wrote Frankie My Dear, an episode I absolutely love. And based on the reception of the video I did covering it, apparently you all do too. All that is to say, animators are human too. Channel your anger toward the episode itself, not the person who wrote it, because I assure you that to this day, she hated it just as much as we did. Alright peeps, I think that'll be all for today. Did you dislike this episode as much as I did? Do you think there's an episode that's even worse? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. As always, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like as it lets me and YouTube know that you're enjoying the content. And if you want to see more videos like this, then be sure to smash the subscribe button, just be sure to get consent before you do. And like I said before, if you want to see my friends and I rank the theme songs of over 180 different cartoons, then feel free to check out my Cartoon Intros Ranked series. Otherwise, I hope you're all doing well, and with that, I shall see you all next time.